Hi guys, it's Kelly Latavola and I am back with another video for Neat and Tangled. This video is celebrating the May release. I'm going to be using a new set called Prehistoric and then an older set from our January release called Calathea. Probably totally murdered the name of that. My apologies. And then I'm going to be using some stitched rectangle dies. I pulled out a bunch of different green inks from Simon Says Stamp, and I'm going to use the leaves in the set to do some stamping background. So I used a stitched rectangle die already. I ran it through my Big Shot. I just can't fit it on my camera. To create a little stitched frame, and I'm going to lightly make a pencil mark just so I know where my leaves need to be inside the frame of the card. So because I've never used these stamps before, I know, isn't that a shame? I've had them since January. I am stamping them off one more time before I put them on my card. Each leaf has two colors because I am going to add a detail layer. So I paired the dusty sage with the sea foam, the fern with the green apple, and the scuba and the lake shores. So now that I have all of it stamping done, just kind of filling in that frame, I'm going to, I didn't want the background to be stark white. I wanted it to have like a kind of background jungle-ish feel, since this is like a prehistoric card. So I'm going to be doing some ink blending with the peacock feathers and then also the salty ocean. So when I just put it on my card, I started on top of the leaves, so that way I would keep the white border around it and I wouldn't have any like big blotches on the background. I'm going to be using Intense Black ink from Simon Says Stamp to go ahead and stamp out my characters. I love these little dinosaurs. They are adorable. There is a little I don't even want to call him a caveman because he's clearly an adorable little boy. A cave boy and a cave girl. And then this woolly mammoth. I mean, they're so cute. There's so many different things that you could do with them or scenes that you could build with them. So I'm just going to keep stamping those out. And then I'm going to get into the Copic coloring. So I started off with these RVs for the dinosaur on the left-hand side. We're going to go through all of the coloring. But I'm going to tell you, it doesn't, you probably saw the card in the beginning of the video, it doesn't match. And it doesn't because I ended up not loving the pink, but we'll get there when we get there. So first thing I'm doing is I'm taking my lightest color and I'm laying in my shadows. I typically color things as if my light source was in the top right hand corner. So the left hand side of his body would be darker, and so would underneath the belly. The back legs, anything you color darker will automatically fall behind. So I, right out the gate, I make the back legs shade darker than the lightest highlight color, because anything that's back there isn't going to have any kind of highlight on it at all. So you can see I'm not really spreading out the color too far. This is just something that's a preference for me, so I don't get too much dark everywhere. Some people have more self-control than that. Apparently, I'm not one of those people. So I have to find other ways to make sure that I don't make my images overly dark. So with the darkest color, I add in that last bit of shading, and then I'm also going to color in the little spots. I feel like it's a her. I feel like it's a mama dinosaur, probably because I'm a mama. That's my only logic, and I'm not even sure that it is actually logical. But anyway, it's a mama dinosaur. That's what we're going with, folks. So now that the shading is done, I'm going to start spreading out that color. So I will tell you, as I was doing this, I realized that my RV04 probably needs to be re-inked. And then I realized, which you would think with as much as I color with these pinks, that it would be an impossibility. I actually don't have a refill for it. So, gonna have to remedy that ASAP because I can't go without my hot pinks in my life. So the last thing I'm going to do is use that RV02, which is the lightest color, to fill in what are the quote-unquote highlights. So the back of the mama dinosaur, the front of her face, and then the back of the front legs. I decided I was going to go, oh, I forgot those little dots, so I had to go back in there. And because my marker wasn't filled awesome, I was just kind of going back over it to try to blend it in. From here, I'm going to move on to the little cave boy. I picked out a couple of browns and one brown that was more on the reddish side to color in his little, what do you even call that? Is it a toga? I'm sure it's probably something terrible like a loincloth, but I feel like that's not as big as this is. So we're going to go with little toga. Anyway, so I did very minimal shading on that. I just added a little bit of depth on either side, and then where it would dip down in between his knees. For his skin tone, I just went with my go-to skin tone. If my light source was in the top right-hand corner, the left-hand side of his face would be a little bit darker, and underneath his hair, where it kind of flops over his forehead, would be a little bit darker. The undersides of the arms underneath his neck, and I did it as if the light was coming in from the right, so then both right sides of his legs, since they are open, I did the shading there as well. A lot of people look at this like EO4 and they're like, I can't believe it. That's the color that you shade with. It's actually, the name of it is actually called like natural lipstick or something. But because Copics are transparent and they work together, you can layer them over one over the other, which you'll see with that dinosaur later. When I put the E11 over it, it really takes out a lot of that redness, a lot of that maroon color, and it's just a really pretty shade to get some depth to the skin tone. So I did pick out some E50s for his hair. These are still warm browns, but not quite as warm as his little toga, because I used that E18 and E19 in it, which is a much more red. His hair is just, I mean, obviously back in the prehistoric days, they weren't like styling. There wasn't any hair gel laying around amongst the, you know, clubs or whatever. So I'm just giving him kind of like a center part that seemed to be what made the most sense to me. And I'm just doing light little flicks of color with the tip of my marker. I am leaving more of a highlight on the right than I did on the left, because that's where the sun would be hitting his hair. So I wanted to make sure that there was a highlight that made sense. All of these colors, all of these E's, are going to be used on our woolly mammoth. So I don't really know a color to color a woolly mammoth. The only woolly mammoth I've ever really seen is like when I was a kid. No, I'm not that old, like in movies. And the one from Ice Age. That's it. That's all I got going on. So I did Google it a little bit. They did seem to be more on the warm brown side. So again, just like I did with the dinosaur, I'm going in coloring as if the light source is in the top right hand corner, so everything on the left is going to be a bit darker. And I'm just adding the shadows with my lightest color, what I feel like kind of made sense. I struggled a little bit with the trunk, like is it going to be behind his body, is it going to be in front of his body? I couldn't really make a choice, so I'm not going to until I get to the darker shading. The tufts of hair on top did seem much darker when I was looking at the photos. So I knew that was going to be darker. I decided that I was going to put the trunk in front of his body as if it was casting a shadow on the back. And then again, just like I did with that dinosaur, I'm automatically going to color those back legs in, just the shade darker. Because his ear kind of sticks out from his body, the edge of his ear would catch the light, but the front of it wouldn't. The front of it would be darker. I'm also accentuating the trunk marks, the texture marks that are drawn into his trunk, just so that way it doesn't look like there's no dimension or no texture, because that isn't really how it would look if, you know, you saw a woolly mammoth in real life. Also, if you see a woolly mammoth in real life, take photos. Yeah, nobody will believe you. So I'm just adding that darker shading to his legs underneath his belly. And this is going to get pretty dark. I will be honest with you, he got a little redder, a little more red. I don't think redder is a thing. More red than I had wanted or anticipated. So careful with that E18, I think it's the 18, maybe it's the 19. One of them, careful, because they are actually really, really auburn color. Oh, here, I'll just look. It's the 19. Beware of the 19. So once I got out to my darkest color, I'm going to go back in and, again, I'm going to start filling in the rest of that body, because all my shading is done now. And So we can just start like blending in those colors. I'm not worrying about a light source or anything like that. Here's where I think my problem came in. When I really started filling in, with that red color. And I thought that the lightest color, which is this E55, would tone down the red more than it did. It didn't. Like, it didn't hardly at all tone down that red. So again, that's just something to be aware of if you give this a try. If you want them to be less red, don't be so heavy-handed with that E19 like I was. So again, just going over everything with that lightest color, trying to get everything to blend really well. There are still some spots where you can see the delineation, which I didn't love, and his hair wasn't dark enough to stand out from the rest of his body. So I'm going to go back in just a little bit. And the wonderful things about Copic is they blend inside the paper, like in the pulp of the paper. So as long as your paper isn't pilling, like you can keep working it and going over it as much as you need to get the blend that you're looking for. Some people want a really, really smooth blend. Some people want something a bit more streaky because it does offer more contrast. So just whatever your preference is. Now that he's done being colored, except for his tusks and his toes, I'm going to go in with the cool grays. You could use warm grays. Cool grays is just my preference. I'm going to add some shading on the underneath of his tusks and also on his little toenails. And just like I did with his legs, when I colored them a shade darker, I colored his toenails that were in the back just one little shade darker. I'm going to do the same thing for the dinosaur over here on the left hand side. The toenails that are in the back, I'm going to do them just one shade just a little bit darker. I used the C1 to go ahead and add just a little bit of depth to the talk bubble, which is going to hold my sentiment, just so that it wouldn't be flat white with all this dimension. Now here's that part I was talking about before where I said I didn't like the color. I didn't like the hot pink next to that super kind of red mammoth. I thought purple would look better, so I'm just taking a VO4 and I'm going over the whole dinosaur. And even though this is kind of scary because we already done all that shading, the shading will stay intact because it's darker than this VO4. So he kind of looks like this kind of super cool mix of a hot pink and purple. And then because I'm using die cuts, I want to make sure that I keep that white edge really nice. So I'm just going in with my 0 marker to kind of clean up those edges. I realized that his dots were not standing out as much, so I went in with a VO9 now that I had changed him to purple and darkened up those spots. I prefer to outline all of my images with a Copic Safe writing pen, so I'm going to go ahead and outline those. If you're going to do that, I recommend that you do it before you die cut, because otherwise you're going to chase little die cuts all around your desk, which is not fun. Speaking of outlining things, I stamped some more of those leaves from the Calathea set, and then I'm just going to outline them with a black pen so everything is matchy and copacetic. Since everything is super, what's the word I'm looking for? It's more detailed coloring. I decided I was going to go in and start just doing just adding a little bit of depth to the leaves. I only did really quick 2-color blends because I already have really beautiful colors down. I just wanted to give them a little bit of depth, since though these are the leaves that are kind of going to be up front and center, where the ones we did earlier were just kind of to fill in the background and to give us a feel of a jungle. We're going to use these to ground our images. So just doing, light flicks of color, mostly from the center out toward the edges, and blending them out just with a slightly lighter color. And I picked just the Copics that I thought went well with the inks that I had already used. So I'm going to go in with a white gel pen now. I'm going to add some little polka dots to my dinosaur, because I typically make a lot of 1-layer cards, so I like to add a lot of little details. So I added the white dots to that particular dinosaur and then also to the leaves. I'm going to go ahead and put my dies in place. I used dies for all of the images I colored with Copics. There are dies for the leaves, but because I wanted them to have a black edge, I decided to fussy cut those. If you wanted the white edge, that's totally fine. I ran that through my Big Shot. I can't bring it on the camera because it's just very difficult. It shakes the whole table. It's a pain. I wish I had a better way to show it. I'll maybe try to come up with something for you. So I wanted the little cave boy, the little mini caveman, to sit on top of my dinosaur. And I wanted them to look like they were one die cut. So I put a little bit of repositional glue on the back of it, and I'm waiting for that to dry. And while I do that, I'm going to stamp my sentiment. This says, "You are dynamite," which I think is super cute. I have a little boy, and I think that this is a card that he will enjoy receiving. So now that the repositional glue is dry, I'm going to go ahead and stick him where I want him to be, and then I'm just going to follow the line of the dinosaur to kind of trim into those white spots. I'm going to pull him back off and then trim out the white parts just around the areas that will sit on top of the dinosaur. And so this will give them the same white edge, but his legs will be will sit on the dinosaur like he's part of that. In order to just clean up those edges and make sure that everything looks like a really smooth, nice cut, going in with a Memento Tuxedo black marker and then just doing the edges of his legs. And I'm also going to hit all of those leaves I fussy cut as well. Now we're going to get to like the building portion of it. I decided I was going to pop up this frame on some foam adhesive. I'm using Scotch mounting tape. This would be a great, this is probably like the second card I've made this week that would be a great shaker. But that's not what I'm doing. I was laying out the card and there just wasn't anywhere really good for me to put this talk bubble. So I decided I was going to trim it into a square, which I did. I connected the line on the bottom where the little tail would come out, and then I just put it on some foam tape. Since I have everything laid out, I'm going to start adhering just the pieces that are going to sit on top of the frame. The reason that I'm taking the time to adhere them now is because it will make it that much easier to flip over my frame later and add that foam tape so that everything is the same level. I glued some of the leaves flat to the card, and then I'm going to pop some of them up. I'm going to tuck them in, and this is just so that there's really good dimension. There's various layers of dimension, and it just makes for, I guess, a more fluid scene. Why am I saying so much tonight? I have no idea what's going on. Anyway, so now that I have everybody just kind of glued in place where I want them to be, I can flip that piece over and then start adding in my foam for the images that are in the center so that they're anchored really well. And that just makes it so easy to know where everything's going to go instead of trying to guess where to add your foam tape and then they don't butt up against each other right and it looks weird. So I'm going to go ahead and adhere that down to my card base, and then I'm going to add in the rest of my leaves. I did end up stamping one more of these teal leaves just so I could have one that kind of poked out. The mammoth is completely out of the frame, the dinosaur is partially out, and this side of the card just looked like it needed something to balance it. So I just added another extra leaf, and then that's it. That's the whole card. So thank you so much for joining me. If you're watching on YouTube, please click in the link, the description below. It'll take you over to the blog, and you can see the entire release for May for Neat and Tangled, which is completely amazing. And I will catch you guys in the next video. Bye.